What kind of town chains a woman to a tree just because she refuses to be ashamed of herself? The question hung in the air like the desert heat over Copper Creek. Even before the chains, even before the cruel whispers turned to cruel hands, Sarah McKinnon always knew this town feared her spirit more than her curves. She was different from the other women, and she never apologized for it. But 1 week earlier, her world still felt steady. Sarah stood in her quiet home on the outskirts of Copper Creek, the morning sun casting long golden stripes across the wooden floor. She held her mother's old diary in her hands, its pages soft from years of reading. Her mother's words lived deep in her heart. In a world that tries to shrink us, stand tall. Your beauty is your strength, not your shame. Sarah closed the diary gently. She tried to hold onto those words as she pulled on her riding clothes. Practical pants and a fitted shirt. Nothing indecent, just clothing that kept her safe while working with wild horses. She had training to do, and she refused to let gossip steal what she loved most. At the stables, she felt at home. Horses didn't judge. They didn't whisper. They didn't fear her strength. They trusted her. Tommy Parker arrived with a new stallion, a powerful animal with fire in his eyes. "Nobody can get near him," Tommy said, shifting nervously, careful not to look directly at her figure. "But they say you have a way." Sarah approached slowly, her voice soft and warm. "Hey there, beautiful," she murmured, letting the horse breathe her in. Soon he relaxed, his muscles loosening as he leaned gently into her touch. That was Sarah's gift. She understood fear, even when it came wrapped in anger. But their quiet moment shattered when Mrs. Abigail Whitmore marched toward them, her voice sharp enough to cut through the air. "Miss McKinnon," she snapped, "your attire and behavior continue to be inappropriate. This is a respectable town." Sarah kept her hand on the stallion, calm as always. "I'm working, Mrs. Whitmore. These clothes keep me safe." "You're setting a dangerous example," Mrs. Whitmore continued. "Young girls are watching you. Riding astride instead of side saddle? Living alone? Doing men's work? This is not how a woman should behave." Sarah finally turned, her eyes steady. "I do my job well. Every horse I train proves that." Mrs. Whitmore's mouth tightened. "You have until Sunday to correct your behavior, or the council will take action." Tommy stood silent, eyes down, but she saw the shame in his expression. Shame not for her, but for the woman scolding her. Still, Sarah held her head high. Mother's words whispered through her heart, "Stand tall." That night, Sarah read another passage from the diary. "They fear what they don't understand, but your body is not a scandal. Your strength is not a sin." Sunday came too quickly. Storm clouds gathered above Copper Creek as the town hall filled with tight faces and hushed gossip. Sarah sat in the back row, her back straight, refusing to shrink herself. Mrs. Whitmore held the decree in her hands like it was holy scripture. "Miss McKinnon has ignored our warnings," she announced. "Her behavior is corrupting our young women." Quote, Betty Wilson, one of Sarah's writing students, stood up. "But she teaches us to be brave." Her mother yanked her down. Reverend Clark added his voice. "Girls as young as 12 try to dress like her. They speak of independence. It must be stopped." Sarah rose, her voice calm. "My work helps people. I gentle horses. I train riders. I am not corrupting anyone." "Silence!" Mrs. Whitmore's hand slapped the podium. "We have reached our decision." She unrolled the decree, the seal shining in the lamplight. "Sarah McKinnon, you are hereby declared a public nuisance and a moral danger." Gasps filled the hall. Sarah stood firm. "You can't do this." "We can," Mrs. Whitmore replied coldly, "and more." Before Sarah could step away, hands grabbed her, rough, tight, unforgiving hands. The hall erupted as they dragged her toward the door, voices rising in a cruel chorus. "Stop!" she cried. "Let go!" Quote. But no one listened. The last thing she saw was young Betty Wilson's terrified eyes as the doors slammed shut behind them. Night swallowed the desert as they dragged her to the old oak tree outside town. The chains were cold, biting into her skin as they wrapped them around her wrists and the rough trunk. "When you are ready to be a proper woman," Mrs. Whitmore whispered, "you will be released." Sarah lifted her chin, eyes burning. "My proper place is wherever I choose to stand." Mrs. Whitmore's face twisted in anger. "Then stand here." And they left her, chained, alone, bruised, but not broken. Dawn came harsh and merciless. The desert sun crawled across her skin. Her throat burned. The chains dug deeper. Townspeople passed by, pretending not to see her, whispering behind their hands. But even chained to a tree, Sarah refused to bow her head. She was her mother's daughter, her father's legacy, her own woman. The chains held her body, but not her spirit. And far across the desert, riding toward Copper Creek, was the one man who would not ignore injustice. A man who would change everything. James Blackwood, the richest rancher in the territory. A man with power, influence, and a heart that had no fear of a woman who refused to be less. And when he saw her chained there, everything in Copper Creek would begin to change. What kind of man looks at a chained woman and decides the whole town must answer for it? James Blackwood had come to Copper Creek for business, but the moment he saw Sarah bound to that oak tree, business became the last thing on his mind. The desert sun fell hard on her skin, and yet she stood tall, refusing to let the chains bend her spirit. That strength hit him straight in the chest. James climbed down from his stallion, moving slowly so he wouldn't frighten her. "Miss McKinnon," he said gently, removing his hat. "I believe you and I have something to discuss." Sarah's lips were dry, her voice rough from thirst. "You should keep riding. Copper Creek doesn't like interference." "I've never cared much for what small-minded people like or don't like," James replied. He pulled out his canteen and held it to her lips. She hesitated, then drank, every swallow a fight against pain. When she finished, she wiped her mouth with shaking hands and asked, "Why are you helping me?" James didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his saddlebag and lifted out a pair of heavy bolt cutters. Their steel jaws glinted in the sun. "I'm helping," he said quietly, "because no decent man rides past injustice." The first chain snapped with a sharp metallic crack that echoed across the empty land. Sarah's right arm dropped free, the blood painfully rushing back to her fingers. She winced, but didn't look away. The second chain fell next. Then the last. When she stumbled, James caught her before she hit the ground. He held her steady but didn't confine her, something she noticed right away. No force, no pressure, only support. "They'll come after you, too," she whispered. "Copper Creek doesn't forgive defiance." "Let them come," James said. "I've dealt with far worse enemies than frightened townsfolk." Behind them, a cloud of dust rose on the horizon. Riders from town. Word traveled fast. Sarah tried to stand on her own, but her legs shook. "My mother's diary," she breathed. "It's in my house. I can't lose it." "We'll get it," James promised. "We'll get everything they tried to take." He lifted her onto his stallion with care. She held the saddle horn tightly, breath uneven. James swung up behind her, the heat of his body strong and steady against her back. "Hold on," he said. Sarah did. She straightened her spine, refusing to lean on him even in her exhaustion. That stubborn strength made James smile despite the danger. Hooves thundered across the desert as they fled the oak tree. Shouts carried on the wind behind them, but the riders didn't pursue far. Copper Creek men rarely stepped beyond their comfort. As the sun dipped low, James's ranch rose from the desert like a quiet refuge. Lanterns glowed warmly in the yard. Maria, the housekeeper, hurried out as James dismounted and carried Sarah inside. "Madre de Dios," Maria whispered. "What did they do to this poor girl?" James lay Sarah gently on a soft bed. Rosa, the ranch healer, wise, calm, and older than most mountains, opened a wooden chest and pulled out jars of thick herbal salves. "Your wrists," Rosa murmured, lifting Sarah's hands. Raw lines cut deep into her skin. These chains were cruel. "Crueler people put them there," Sarah whispered. Rosa dabbed the salve gently. It stung at first, then cooled like water poured over fire. Maria brought warm cloths, whispering prayers in Spanish. "Why?" Sarah asked softly. "Why are you doing all this?" Quote. James stepped forward, his voice low and steady. "Because my mother was like you, braver than the world knew what to do with. They didn't chain her to a tree, but they broke her spirit in other ways. I swore I would never stand by and watch it happen to another woman." Sarah looked away, swallowing hard. "You barely know me." "I know enough." Footsteps thundered outside. Shouts filled the yard. "James!" Rosa warned. James strode to the door and threw it open. Sheriff Mills and 2 riders waited in the yard, trying to look stern, but their eyes wavered. "We've come for the McKinnon woman," the sheriff called. "Town council's orders." James didn't move. "This is my land, and on my land you answer to me. The council holds no authority here." "That's not how this works," the sheriff argued, though doubt colored his voice. James stepped closer, his tone cold as iron. "Cross my fence without permission, and you become trespassers. Try to take her, and you become something worse." Rosa and Maria watched from behind Sarah, eyes sharp as blades. The sheriff shifted in his saddle. "The council says she's a danger." James's jaw tightened. "The only danger here is people who believe they can chain a woman to a tree because they fear her." Sarah stood in the doorway now, bandaged wrists trembling but her spine straight as ever. "Sheriff," she said calmly, "go home. This isn't justice. It's cruelty dressed as righteousness." Mills couldn't meet her eyes. "This isn't over," he muttered before turning his horse. James didn't speak until the last rider faded into the night. When he returned inside, Sarah was standing, her strength returning like a slow sunrise. "They'll come back," she whispered. "Let them," James said. "We'll be ready." She looked at him for a long moment. "Why fight for me?" "Because someone should have fought for my mother," he answered. "Because you didn't deserve this, and because sometimes the right fight finds you." Sarah touched her bandaged wrist, then looked toward the window where the moon hung bright. A storm was coming, and they both knew it. But she wasn't facing it alone anymore, not with James Blackwood standing beside her. What happens when a whole town finally realizes the woman they tried to break has become the one thing they can't control? Morning came with a quiet tension hanging over James Blackwood's ranch. Sarah stood by the window, watching dust rise on the horizon. Riders. Many riders. Copper Creek wasn't done with her, not even close. James stepped beside her, adjusting his vest like a man preparing for war. "They're coming sooner than I thought." Quote. "They won't stop," Sarah whispered, her wrists still wrapped in Rosa's healing salve. "They think they own me. They think they own every woman in that town." James turned to her. "Not anymore." The rumble of hooves grew louder. When the riders finally appeared, it wasn't just men. Women, too, standing behind them, faces tight with judgment. And leading the group, wrapped in her black dress like a funeral crow, was Mrs. Abigail Whitmore herself. Sheriff Mills rode beside her, looking like he wished the ground would open and swallow him whole. "Blackwood," Mrs. Whitmore called from beyond the ranch fence. "Send out the McKinnon woman. She must answer for her actions." James didn't move an inch. Her only action was existing, and you punished her for it. "She defied our ways," Mrs. Whitmore snapped. "She's corrupted our daughters." Sarah stepped forward, her voice carrying clear and steady. "Your daughters don't need corruption to want freedom. They need courage, and they're finding it." A murmur rippled through the crowd, and then small footsteps rushed past the ranch hands. Betty Wilson, no more than 12 years old, ran straight out of the house and pressed herself against the fence. "You can't take her," Betty shouted. "She teaches us to be brave." Her father, red-faced and trembling, tried to pull her back. "Betty, get over here." "No," Betty cried, her chin trembling but held high. "Miss McKinnon teaches us we don't have to be afraid of who we are." Whispers spread among the townspeople. The men shifted in their saddles. The women pressed their lips into tight lines that looked a lot like doubt. James touched the fence rail, leaning forward just enough. "You hear that, Mrs. Whitmore? Your fear isn't stronger than their courage anymore." Mrs. Whitmore's face twisted. "Sheriff, do your duty." Sheriff Mills swallowed hard, then dismounted. Instead of marching toward the gate like she expected, he stepped forward, removed his badge, and held it up to the crowd. "I won't uphold cruelty anymore," he said. "Not in this town." Gasps erupted. Mrs. Whitmore's voice cracked with fury. "You traitor!" "No," Mills said quietly. "I just finally remembered what justice is." The tension snapped like a rope finally giving way. The last of Mrs. Whitmore's loyal riders moved forward, hands drifting toward their rifles. Sarah breathed in sharply. The moment had come. She walked toward James's horse and reached for something she knew how to use better than most men in the territory. Her lasso. The rope hung coiled and calm, worn smooth from years of gentling wild horses. She stepped to the fence, mounted James's stallion in one swift, confident motion, and sat tall. Mrs. Whitmore sneered. "You dare mount a horse in front of us?" Sarah's voice rang out like a bell. "I dare to live." The first attacker lifted his rifle, but before he could aim, Sarah's lasso flew. It looped perfectly around his weapon, yanking it clean from his hands. He gasped in shock as it clattered to the dirt. "No more weapons," Sarah said. "You want to face me? Face me without fear, without force." James's ranch hands began disarming the rest, swift and coordinated. Some townsmen backed away, shame dawning on their faces. But there she stood, Mrs. Whitmore, burning with rage, refusing to step down. "You think this changes anything?" Mrs. Whitmore screamed. "You think one rebellious woman and a rich man can rewrite our town?" Sarah leaned forward in her saddle, the lasso in her hand steady and sure. "No," she said, "I think we can." The women who had joined Mrs. Whitmore looked down at their daughters, at their own hands, at the fear that had kept them quiet for years. Slowly, one by one, they stepped back. Mrs. Whitmore was alone. The sheriff turned to her. "It's over." She lifted her chin in one last burst of pride. "This town will fall without order." "No," Sarah said. "It will rise with freedom." Mrs. Whitmore rode away alone, her black dress flapping behind her like a flag of a defeated army. Silence settled over the ranch. Then, a single cheer rose from the women, then more and more, until it spread like wildfire. Sarah dismounted, her legs weak but steady, the lasso still in her grip. James walked to her, brushing dust from her cheek. "You didn't just save yourself." Sarah looked at the young girls gathering around her, their faces bright with hope. "Neither did you." He smiled. "Partners, then?" "Partners." Days passed, then weeks, then months. Copper Creek changed in ways no one had believed possible. The town council was replaced with men and women. Laws were rewritten. Chains were removed from the old oak tree and melted down into a plaque that read, "Here she stood unbroken. Let all who stand hereafter remember that courage cannot be chained." A year later, Sarah and James stood beneath that same oak tree, hand in hand, as her riding students crossed the stage of the new academy she founded. Girls from all over the territory came to learn from her. Strength, dignity, freedom, love. And James? He stood beside her as her equal, always proud, always steady, always the man who stopped when others looked away. Sarah touched the wooden inlay ring on her finger, carved from the oak that once held her captive. Now it symbolized her rise. She looked at James as the sun dipped low over Copper Creek. "We changed everything," she whispered. James squeezed her hand. "No," he said gently, "you did." And Sarah McKinnon, once chained, once ridiculed, once feared, stood tall under the oak tree, free, loved, unbreakable.